It wasn't just a film. It was a monster. Jaws. All teeth and adrenaline, Jaws tapped into something primal.
The film scared me to death.
Da-da, da-da, bum, 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 bum. It was scary.
But making the movie was scarier still.
There was a catastrophe going on.
Battling through production disasters.
I had never experienced anything like this before.
We thought we were going to be there for the rest of our lives.
To take adventure filmmaking to the edge and beyond.
Steven was fired every day.
When I thought, oh my God, what have I done?
This is Jaws, the inside story. A thrill ride into the dark waters of our fears, Jaws stunned the nation when it hit the screen in 1975. It would become the biggest grossing film of its time, the most successful movie that had ever been made.
I don't know why Jaws was a phenomenon.
He wanted to make a bullet, one story like that.
It was effective as a suspense yarn. It was effective as an action-adventure movie.
This is a movie that is so streamlined that this killing machine of entertainment.
I felt we had a really terrific movie.
Jaws was definitely the first blockbuster.
During the summer of 1975, the movie sunk its teeth into the American audience and would not let go. Lines stretched around the block.
People lining up, not just around the block, but then around the block that was next to the block to try and get in and see this. I mean, it became this huge cultural phenomena.
It was a simple idea, man versus shark. The story of a small beachside town under attack from a giant predator. And the small-town police chief who must find some way to combat this monster from the deep, a 25-foot great white shark.
You gotta get a bigger boat.
We better get a bigger boat.
We're gonna need a bigger boat.
You know, he's out there standing on the stern, chumming, and all of a sudden the shark comes up. Just like, wow!
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Jaws was a voyage into the darkness, an epic confrontation with a nightmare. But the filmmakers were setting out to create something more than just a horror film. An adventure story that centered on the humanity of the characters. Brody, the small-town police chief.
He's thrown into this situation. He doesn't even like the watch. He's this ordinary man that's confronted with this 60-million-year-old conflict. Who's going to survive?
Hooper, the wisecracking young marine biologist.
I'm not going to waste my time arguing with a man who's lining up to be a hot lunch.
Richard Dreyfuss's portrayal of Matt Hooper is one of the great comedic performances of the 70s.
It's just energy, energy, energy.
I remember thinking, boy, that's just about the best work I ever did.
Quint, the shark hunter, the old man of the sea.
Captain Quint, played by the late, great Robert Shaw. This guy has seen things that would curl your hair.
He's as tough as nails. He thinks that there's no way that a shark could get the better of him.
Brody's wife, Ellen, the young mother who gives the movie its human touch.
Want to get drunk and fool around?
Murray Hamilton as the mayor who's trying to keep everything under wraps so that nothing will harm the town's tourist economy.
You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
And an island full of victims.
You knew there was a shark out there.
In the end, the film would immortalize its stars, its creator, the Martha's Vineyard location, and of course, the shark. But this is one film that came close to not happening at all. And for those who created it, the making of Jaws was as much of an adventure as the movie itself, starting with a 27-year-old director who worried that this would be the movie that sunk his career before it even got started, Steven Spielberg.
It was the hardest production I've ever experienced, and I still have nightmares about it.
They started Jaws, big movie, without a script, without a shark, and without a cast.
Shooting Jaws was really a living nightmare. I dreamt about it at night, woke up with that sick stomach in the pit of my gut. I felt that I was the eye of the hurricane. You know, all this fell on me.
We were doing stuff that no one ever tried before, you know, we were winging it.
Problems with sharks, boats, and the New England weather made the shoot drag on to triple the shooting schedule and more than double the budget. as the crew worried that Jaws might be a disaster film in more ways than one.
It was almost a mission impossible.
The story of Jaws begins with Peter Benchley, a struggling young writer with an idea about a fish.
He was broke and down on his luck, and he was sitting on the beach, looking out to sea.
That led him to think, what would happen if there happened to be a great white shark that came in and harassed a town?
What if? What if?
And I remember him telling it to me, and I said, Peter, that's just the craziest idea I've ever heard. I think of something else, honey.
That idea changed not only his life, changed my life, David Brown's life, Steven Spielberg's life. That idea, it hit a primal chord.
Producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown, fresh off a triumph with The Sting, heard about the hot new manuscript through publishing sources, including Brown's wife, Cosmopolitan editor Helen Gurley Brown. Zanuck brought it into their offices, and that's where a young director saw it.
There was a big pile of white pages stacked about, 6 inches thick on his secretary's desk, and the top page said Jaws. And I didn't know what it was about. Jaws, it sounded interesting.
Steven Spielberg was an ambitious young director with a few credits to his name.
He had snuck onto the lot one day and eventually kind of wormed his way into getting a job. He did some TV. He worked on Night Gallery, which was like Rod Serling's show after The Twilight Zone. And that led to his first theatrical movie, which was The Sugarland Express. It's this couple on the run story starring Goldie Hawn, and it kind of tanked.
Spielberg was no superstar at the time, but the producers sensed his potential.
Steven knew more about moving people in the camera and the lenses and how to work out and block out a scene better than anybody.
Dick said he said, there's already a director on the project, but I'd love your opinion of it. Will you read it?
For Spielberg, the script struck a chord.
It was similar in a thematic way to a film I had done for ABC Movie of the Week called Duel.
It's like a prototype for Jaws. He's menaced by this huge 16-wheel truck on the highway.
You never saw who was in the truck. It was just the fear that it could put in you.
I came into the office the next, on Monday, and I remember saying to Dick Zanuck, look, if anything ever happens with this director that you've assigned this project to, if for some reason he drops out, I would love to tell the story.
But the producers were sticking with their director, at least until one unfortunate meeting.
I'll never forget it. The guy said, I have a clear vision of starting the picture. We're underwater, and then we come above water, and we see the town. And then the whale jumps out. And so eventually looked at him for a long time, we all did, and said, you mean the shark?
Peter Benchley said, look, I don't want to work with a director that can't distinguish, the shark from the whale, from Moby Dick. So it came to me.
I said, we don't want an experienced hand. I don't want to do the same adventure picture. This kid will do something brilliant.
They offered Jaws to Spielberg, but ironically at the time, Spielberg had his doubts. Friends had written a screenplay called Lucky Lady that Spielberg was eager to make instead. The ambitious young director turned for advice to his mentor, Sid Sheinberg, president of MCA Universal.
I'm sure that on my tombstone, somebody will write, this is the man that discovered Steven Spielberg. And obviously you can't discover Steven Spielberg, you can discover a mountain. I developed this relationship with Steven in his early career, and I kind of functioned, among other things, as his in-house agent.
Spielberg showed him the script for Lucky Lady.
He said, I agree, sir, that it's a well-written screenplay, but this is not commercial and you need to make Jaws.
In fact, as Lucky Lady became a star vehicle for Burt Reynolds and Liza Minnelli, Spielberg would wonder if he had made the right choice.
He actually got upset at me because I literally ordered him to do it. And his attitude for a while was, you're my friend. How can you make me do this fish picture?
It was a question he would ask more than once over the coming months. Why had he given up Lucky Lady?
I wasn't glad he talked me out of it on the 45th day of shooting Jaws. I kind of was almost angry that I was making the movie halfway through.
Turning Jaws into a movie would prove an epic task, as filming on the real Atlantic Ocean would nearly break the entire cast and crew.
That decision haunted us that entire summer.
It was sort of slapdash.
No one knew what was going to hit them when we got into the boat for the first time to go out to sea.
This is the story of Jaws, the story of a 25-foot monster that nearly ate an entire production.
Mr. Vaughn, I pulled a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the wrecked hull of a boat out there, and it was the tooth of a great white.
The year was 1974, and Jaws was climbing the bestseller lists. But bringing the shark to the screen would prove a major challenge. In the history of movies, there had been films about mummies and monster gorillas, and even invaders from Mars. But no one had ever thought to make a movie about a giant shark and to do it on the open ocean. That was unprecedented. For young Steven Spielberg, starting his first big Hollywood feature, the key to the movie was how real it felt, how vivid, both the shark and the location.
It was suggested to me that the film be shot in a big tank on the back lot of a studio. Other people thought we should go to a calm lake. I was the only person who basically insisted that we shoot it in the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it was insane.
No other film company had really done anything like that.
It's crazy that they let him go shoot on the ocean. I don't think it would happen these days. No way.
Lake water, pond water, tank water doesn't have the same texture or even violence that the ocean has. And this needed to be a convincing story about a great white shark, because if it wasn't, nobody would really believe it.
The producers were worried, but Spielberg was adamant. No ocean, no film.
That decision haunted us that entire summer. We fought the Atlantic Ocean day after day after day, and many's the day we came back with our tail between our legs.
Meanwhile, producers Brown and Zanuck were also focusing on the shark. When they bought the rights, they had figured they could simply get an animal trainer. What they didn't know is you can't wrangle a great white shark.
Could they have cast Jaws, the real shark in this movie? No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think you can sort of make them jump through hoops like dolphins.
They were just starting to get a sense of the size of their problem when they brought their production team on board. Line producer Bill Gilmore and art director Joe Alves. Alves would be responsible for the visual concept of the film, the look of the shark, and the entire production.
They just purchased this book called Jaws. And they're going to have some problems with it conceptually because it was this huge shark. And exactly how it was going to be done, they didn't know.
Alves started drawing.
I did a number of sketches, very, very large charcoal renderings of the various activities that were described in the book. To me, the only thing I really had to base that kind of thing on was Moby Dick. So a lot of it looks like Moby Dick. This was a front elevation of the shark when I started doing detailed drawings of the shark, but it became T-shirts later. Everybody we had a silkscreen made T-shirts. This is just an aerial shot of the shark and the boat size, just to give us a relative size scale. This was my first concept of 30-foot shark. It was a little too big. We made it 25, but that gives you an idea. Beast to man.
The production team had to move fast. Early in 1974, with the novel at #1 on the bestseller list, the pressure was mounting to make the film as quickly as possible while the country was still interested. The first challenge, with Spielberg's decision about the ocean, they had to find a place to film. The right location for the fictional Amity Island.
I had heard a lot about Martha's Vineyard as a small summer community that might suit this picture. I saw other areas I saw the Cape Cod area, and I saw Long Island. And Martha's Vineyard was quaint enough, and the Edgartown harbor especially was what we wanted for this picture. So it was sort of a joint effort on our parts to get ourselves in all this trouble.
But not everyone on the island was thrilled.
A lot of people hated it. They couldn't park, they couldn't move. There were crowds, there were boats, everything was discombobulated.
With the location set, in spite of local objections, the focus shifted to the script, and the script was far from ready.
To the best of my recollection, the first draft of the script was quite disappointing.
We didn't really have a finished script.
Peter struggled with the first draft of the screenplay, and Peter wrote about 3 different drafts.
Peter came to me and said, I'm written out on this. This is the best I can do. And so I was sort of lost. I didn't know what to do.
Looking for help, Spielberg turned to his producers.
David Brown said, there's a writer who wrote a play, a great award-winning, Tony Award-winning play called The Great White Hope. And his name's Howard Sackler, and he's a friend of mine. And I said, great, The Great White Hope, The Great White Shark. You know, at least, you know, we're in the same genre.
Spielberg and Sackler worked together for 3 weeks, laying out the foundation for the movie. It was a start, but Spielberg knew it had to be more than just a monster film.
I basically went to a friend of mine, just a social friend of mine, Carl Gottlieb, who had written comedy, because I felt that we needed to have some kind of levity in this movie.
I was working on The Odd Couple, the TV show in those days. I was a story editor. I was a comedy writer on television. So he sent me a copy of the script, and with a note on it that said, eviscerate it.
I really wanted, you know, some jokes in my movie. I didn't want it just to be a dark sea hunt.
I made an extensive set of notes and sent it to Steven as a memo. Said, hey, this is, you know, if we're working together, this is probably what I would do.
Spielberg was having a working breakfast with Zanuck and Brown when he showed them Gottlieb's ideas.
Steven called me on a Sunday morning, like at 9, 10 o'clock, and said, can you get over to the Bel Air Hotel and meet with Richard Zanuck and David Brown to talk about the script? And we started talking, and breakfast turned into lunch, turned into tea time, turned into dinner.
The next day, he was hired as the writer.
Peter blessed the day when they brought in Carl Gottlieb, because Carl was great.
Even as Spielberg started casting the film, Gottlieb moved into the next room of the hotel writing away. And soon after, with the script still in flux, he and Spielberg arrived on Martha's Vineyard to start pre-production in their log cabin home.
All our waking hours when Steven wasn't shooting, we were talking about the script and what needed to be done.
I consider this house an island on an island. And I'm very used to Los Angeles. I'm very used to the constant buzz of the freeway, and this is one place that you don't have that. Matter of fact, there are no sounds around here at all. And it took 3 weeks getting used to. It took a couple of weeks trying to get to sleep at night because I didn't hear a constant presence noise.
But even as they were planning the film, the clock was ticking. It was April, and the producers were worried how long the book would stay popular. And even worse, the Screen Actors Guild was threatening a strike by midsummer.
The studio kept saying, you have to finish the picture before this potential strike.
They wanted to finish shooting by June 15th.
And that meant everything was rushed.
Steven was getting very nervous about all of this and the strike deadline. So Joe or somebody tipped me off and said, you know, Steven's coming over to back away from the picture.
Zanuck thought fast and put on his Jaws t-shirt.
He comes in and took a long look at the t-shirt, and he couldn't get the words out.
So Spielberg was back on board, but the start date was looming. The script was changing day to day, and scariest of all, none of the stars Spielberg wanted were interested.
And he said, you want to do it? And I said, no. And he said, what? Why? I said, well, that's going to be a bitch to shoot.
The spring of 1974 found the Jaws team getting increasingly nervous. They had a director and a best-selling concept, but they didn't have their main actors.
So there was a scramble to fill those roles because they were going to start shooting very soon.
Spielberg wasn't looking for superstars.
The superstar was going to be the shark. That was at least my plan going in.
But the 3 key roles were all uncast, starting with Quint, the shark hunter.
I only had one person in mind to play the part. I wanted Lee Marvin.
Lee Marvin was actually available, but he was sport fishing down in Cabo San Lucas on a real boat fishing for real big fish, and he didn't want to cut short his vacation.
He basically said, no, when I go fishing, I really want to go fishing for the real thing. I'm not interested in making a fishing movie.
His next choice was veteran actor Sterling Hayden.
I've always been a big fan of Sterling Hayden, you know, especially, you know, in the movie Dr. Strangelove, and also, you know, in The Godfather.
Sterling Hayden knew the sea, and he knew fishing. Before he was a movie star, he had been a sailor. But he had one problem.
Sterling owed the government millions and millions in back taxes, and they would seize his salary. So basically, he'd be working for the government, so he chose not to do that.
The producers kept calling and kept striking out.
Everybody considered it kind of a schlock piece, and everybody passed.
And it was Richard Zanuck and David Brown together that said, why don't you consider Robert Shaw? I think he'd be great.
Zanuck and Brown had worked with him on The Sting. Steven and I loved him because he was the best
villain ever in a James Bond movie. He was the only credible threat that Sean Connery ever faced, because he was a big, muscular guy who was as dangerous as Sean.
He was an enormous personality.
Robert Shaw was the most eccentric, and so, you know, you got to love him for what he was.
This shark, swallow you whole. Shaking, tenderizing, down you go.
With Quintcast, they turned to Hooper, the young marine biologist.
The studio had wanted, I think Jan Michael Vincent was high on their list, because he corresponded to the character in the book. Tall, blonde, handsome, you know, seafaring snob.
But that wasn't Spielberg's idea.
Richard Dreyfuss was my first choice.
And he said, "You want to do it?" And I said, "No." And he said, "What? Why?" I said, "Well, that's going to be a bitch to shoot."
He thought I was crazy to make the movie and tried to talk me out of making the movie.
I'm lazy, and I'd rather just watch it than shoot it. And I turned him down.
Gottlieb called Dreyfuss and begged him to come up to Boston to meet with them in person.
And he walked in the door essentially looking like Hooper. He had a scraggly beard and rimless glasses, and we took one look at him and said, "That guy. Don't change a thing, don't shave, don't clean up. You're the guy."
And then I turned him down again.
He at one point said, "Hey, why don't both of us say no together?" So we both, because this is crazy. Who wants to go out to sea to make a movie about a shark?
Dreyfuss thought he was all through with Jaws. Then he went to see how his first starring role had turned out in The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz.
I was so convinced that if it was released in the United States, I would never work again because I was the worst actor in America, that I called Steven and begged for the part.
Who are you? Matt Hooper. I'm from the Oceanographic Institute.
Oh, for Christ's sakes, you're the guy we called. I'm Brody.
Oh, I'm very glad to meet you.
Yeah, I'm glad to meet you.
The police chief had to be the audience. I just needed somebody vulnerable that the audience could hang their hats on and say, "I'm with you." You know, if you show fear, then I'm going to really feel fear. And I was at a party one day, and at Andrea Eastman's house, and I was sitting there, and somebody walked over to me and introduced himself to me and said, "You're sitting here all alone. Are you okay?" And it was Roy Scheider. And I just began pouring my heart out to this complete stranger who I certainly knew from the French connection, but I was really preoccupied with this problem, not being able to cast, Chief Brody. And I told him the whole story. I even told him the 5 or 6 actors I had talked to that I decided that I didn't want to go with. And Roy looked at me and he said, "What about me? I'm an actor. I'd love to be in Jaws." And that's how Roy and I came to do it together.
Ironically, this was the one role that a big star actually wanted to play. Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur, Moses, and Michelangelo. But for Spielberg, he was just too big for the part.
I just thought it was 12 cylinders when I only needed about 8, for that particular part. I thought it was too big. I thought for Charlton Heston to play that part would be a little bit not fair for the shark, because the shark wouldn't last through the first act.
Scheider was the man for the job.
I've been thinking about for months. I've been thinking about in months what it's going to be like to be trapped in this boat while it's sinking. And what does a person really think when that happens to them, especially a character that's aquaphobic, as mine is, who doesn't like water at all. And I have nightmares about that, yes.
He was a rock, and everyone relied on Roy being a rock.
He was just a real pro.
And I think any actor who's working on a project isn't only working on it during the hours when he's shooting it, he's thinking about it all the time.
Scheider was paired with actress Lorraine Gary.
I somehow said, "That's Roy Scheider's wife." It was just a very intuitive, quick decision. It felt like a real marriage, into its 11th year.
Lorraine Gary was the wife of Sid Sheinberg, the president of the studio. There are a lot of suggestions that it was a political choice on Steven's part to cast her. So Steven said no. She was a terrific actress.
There's a lot in Jaws that derives from the fact that you really like the people. You like the home family.
I have such a soft, wonderful, loving spot in my heart for Lorraine. I thought, what, not only a terrific actress, but what a stunning human being.
Then there were the characters everyone loved to hate.
I was a fan of Murray Hamilton's, especially, as Mr. Robinson in The Graduate. I thought he'd be a great mayor of Amity.
Murray had those wonderful anchors in his coat. I mean, that was a sport coat that was an incredible find.
He was the perfect small-town politician.
He does this kind of like unctuous corporate toady. He's a shark in a suit, essentially.
Gottlieb himself had been cast as the newspaper publisher Meadows.
The part of Meadows in the book is a significant part. He's one of the villains alongside of Murray Hamilton, who played the mayor.
He was the man with the Nantucket red pants who disappeared halfway through the movie.
The most painful thing I've ever done as a writer is write out my character as an actor. As we were rewriting the film, it became evident that the character just wasn't that necessary.
Then they just had to find Chrissy, the beautiful sacrificial victim in the first scene. The problem was, the role demanded three things that didn't always go together: beauty, toughness, and a willingness to get naked.
That's a hard combination to find.
Desperate, they put out a casting call, and a mermaid walked in. An animal trainer and stunt woman from Weeki Wachee Springs, her name was Susan Backlini, and she wanted the part.
I sold them the fact that if they hired me, I could do the underwater work and above the water work, whereas if they used an actress that couldn't do the stunt part of it, then you've got, you can't show your face, you just can't show the terror as much.
This girl walked into my office one day at Universal. She was very attractive, had a great body.
They always make you get undressed, and I hate that. And I thought, well, maybe if I put a photo in my book, they wouldn't make me get undressed.
I opened the folder, and it was her nude. And there she was standing in front of me, and I blushed like mad. So I rushed up to Steven, and I handed him the folder. He looked up at me and said, "Yeah, but can she act?" I said, "Steven, give me a break."
On Martha's Vineyard, they had a cast, but they needed the star, the shark. And the shark was missing in action.
They couldn't make the shark work.
It kept failing and failing and failing and failing.
The shark is not working. The shark is not working. Repeat, the shark is not working.
It was May of 1974, and Jaws was just about to start rolling. Only one thing was missing: the shark. It was the key to the film.
In my script, I had the shark in the first scene. You saw the fin, you saw part of the tail, you saw a little bit of the conical nose.
The team had been working on it for months, but this was a production challenge no one had ever faced before.
We had no way of shooting a full-size shark in the water.
The special effects department at Universal said, look, we got too much to do. This is really complicated.
I mean, it would take us 3 years.
Nobody's ever built a 25-foot shark. Forget it.
And besides, we had more important effects movies.
That year, Universal's big films were Airport 75 and Hindenburg.
Jaws was really looked upon as a $2-3 million horror film.
I almost felt like they were hoping we would fail.
Alves couldn't find anyone at any studio to build that shark, so he turned to someone who had just retired, Bob Matty.
Bob Matty was probably one of the most interesting characters that I've ever met in my life.
Matty had built the giant squid and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, he started designing a shark on a moving crane.
It took us 2/3 of the way through shooting to figure out whether, in fact, we had bought the right concept or the wrong concept.
In fact, it wasn't just a single shark.
We needed a left shark, we needed a right shark, we needed the head, and of course then we needed the sled shark where it would swim by and we'd see the fins. I think there was like 5 pieces that we needed to make.
Later, the shark would get a name.
Bruce got his name. It's my lawyer's name. I named the shark after my lawyer. He's still my lawyer, by the way.
After months building the sharks on the West Coast, they were ready to ship them east, to the special effects workshop on Martha's Vineyard known as Shark City. All systems were go on the shark, but when it came time to test it out, they had a disaster. The shark had worked fine in the freshwater tanks in California, but here in the Atlantic Ocean, with the salt water, their electrical circuits started going haywire.
Salt water is just, eats everything alive.
But the team didn't give up. The entire shark system was remade using old-school pneumatics, blasts of compressed air to make the shark move.
We had a big compressor on the boat, and the air goes down these big hoses.
So somebody would say, snap the mouth. Okay, start it.
The air would go all the way 150 feet out to the shark. And one lever would control the eyes, the fins. There were about 10, 12 guys pulling levers.
It was an ingenious new system, But each day, something would break and have to be repaired.
A lot of times we put the shark in the water and it wouldn't move.
We would have to get in and re-weld it, repatch it, re-bolt it, rebuild it, whatever.
And one night, Spielberg's pal snuck in and did some damage too.
George Lucas crawled in, the jaw. Well, Steven was trying to work the thing. George was crawling in to see how the hydraulics work. So I think he tried to close the jaws on George or something like that. And the shark broke. And we all ran away like bad little kids.
All the while, Spielberg was intent on keeping everything about the shark a secret, until the day the secret was blown.
Somehow a copy of the carcass of this wooden shark, plastic shark, got into Time magazine or someplace.
Not only did they print that there was a shark and we're building the shark, they snuck into the boathouse and they took a picture of the wrong side of the shark with all the mechanics.
The picture got out and wound up in Time magazine. And it was very upsetting.
I thought he was going to kill somebody. He was absolutely convinced that that was a fact worse than death.
I always thought that if the audience knew that we were working with a big mechanical shark with hoses and tubes coming out of it in all directions on a big kind of gantry with a crane arm that was meant to thrust it out of the water, they could see who was actually in the booth pretending to be the Wizard of Oz, that everybody would not want to come see the movie. They would not want to come see the movie about a mechanical shark.
An even greater concern for Spielberg, with the movie about to start shooting, even with the changes in technology, the shark still wasn't working.
Well, we spent the whole movie worried about believability of the mechanical shark.
It was a joke among the crew that you didn't have to worry about this shark because it made so much noise and went so slowly that, you could get out of the water and you could get off the island before it could get to you.
It kept failing and failing and failing and failing.
All over the island through the radio mics, you could hear,
"The shark is not working. The shark is not working."
The pressure kept mounting as the days dragged on.
And every night when we screened the footage and the shark didn't work, we worried more and more that we had a problem.
The shark never worked. So the film he intended to shoot couldn't be shot.
In my script, you actually saw the shark attacking and devouring Chrissy Watkins. There was much more shark in the storyboards throughout the movie.
But the shark not working changed everything.
I had no choice but to figure out how to tell the story without the shark.
He had to invent on the spot another way of shooting, which was to imply the shark, which made the film a great film.
I just went back to Alfred Hitchcock. What would Alfred Hitchcock do in a situation like this? So imagining a Hitchcock movie instead of a Godzilla movie, I suddenly got the idea that we can make a lot of hay out of the horizon line and not being able to see your feet, not being able to see anything below the waistline when you're treading water. What is down there is what we don't see, which is really, truly frightening.
So they made the decision to not show the shark. And of course, that was, in many ways, the making of the movie.
And that invited the audience to come to the movie bringing their collective imaginations. And their imaginations helped me make that film a success.
In a way, the shark not working would be the key to the whole movie.
Trying to go under. I tell you, he can with 3 barrels on him. Not with 3, he can.
All these moments really was kind of a divine providence saying, there's another way, a better way to make this movie, and I better listen. And I did. I listened to the muses.
But the struggles with the shark were just the beginning, because now the production was heading into uncharted waters.
It was one of the most dangerous things that happened.
Martin, you going to shut down the beaches on your own authority?
Well, what other authority do I need?
Technically, you need a civic ordinance or a resolution by a board of selectmen. That's just going by the book.
By the late spring of 1974, the Jaws production had taken over Martha's Vineyard.
It was like the circus came to town. It was the biggest thing that I'd ever seen.
As the crew settled in, Spielberg and Gottlieb were trying to build a script.
We were working all the time. We'd get back when the sun went down, and we wouldn't have much time to do much else. We had dinner together, and we spent several hours working on the next day's pages, literally what we were about to shoot the next day.
A lot of this movie kind of happened at night in that log cabin.
Carl was there doing rewrites with Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw, Roy Scheider, myself, Lorraine Gary. I think in a sense, at that point, it became a little bit like Casablanca, where everybody was throwing their ideas into a central mixing pot, and Carl was organizing the ideas into script form.
It made it a joy to write for because you could talk with the actors about what they were going to say, and they could supply suggestions because actors study their characters more than anyone else.
It was the most collaborative process I have ever experienced in terms of actors making contributions to a screenplay. All these contributions were trying to get these people, the characters, to come to life.
It was a wonderful time, and everybody's focus was the movie.
But not everyone thought it was so wonderful.
One of the really scary things of my career was having dinner in Steven's house on Martha's Vineyard, and then he and Carl Gottlieb would sit down to prepare the next day's work. It's kind of scary because you wonder whether this is all going to fit together.
Cameraman Bill Butler also had his hands full. Spielberg had a very specific look in mind for the water scenes.
I said to Bill, I want the audience to feel like they're always drowning in the water, that I want to get the water level right up to the lens. Bill invented this box with a glass window, we could call it a water box, and just lower it right down to the water line and get these kind of amazing shots.
Well, that was to create the anxiety that maybe there's a shark right there.
It all came together in the dramatic first sequence.
What's your name again?
Chrissy.
It's a beach party, and a girl and I sort of catch eyes.
I was kind of sitting off by myself, just not doing much of anything. And a young gentleman came up, and I just got up and ran away.
She rips off her clothes and heads into the water, and I try to rip my clothes off and stumble and fall.
The Susan Baccalini effect sequence of being killed by the shark, I still think to this day was one of the most dangerous things that happened.
He told me, he said, when your scene is finished, I want the people under the chairs with the popcorn and the bubble gum. The cameraman, the assistant cameraman, Steven Spielberg was in the water with me the whole time. And they had a box that was a big black box with the camera in it, and it was half underwater and half above the water. And they kept it right on that level.
You never see the shark, which was by design.
She was actually being tugged left and right by 10 men on one rope and 10 men on the other back to shore. And that's what caused her to move like that.
They attached me with cables and ran cables from the beach all the way out to pilings. And then they just did the jerking back and forth part like that.
Putting the girl on that pulley and having her, just the idea of it was more horrifying than seeing the shark.
If 10 people pulled at the same time, everybody warned me the pure power of people pulling on her body in two different directions. You would really hurt her back. So that was a very dangerous thing.
I figured screaming like I was, if something did happen, nobody would know it. Nobody would have known to come help me.
It was so terrifying to see her dragged back and forth and then under that it mesmerized the audience.
The very last shot when I go under, he did the pulling on that because he wanted it just a certain way.
She's praying, and then she comes into a close-up, and then she's gasping for air, and then she's pulled down, and I was on the rope for that last tug.
Later, they would add the finishing touch.
Susan and Steven were looping the screams, and he had her tilt her head back, and he poured water down her throat while she screamed, which is now known as waterboarding. So Steven is actually guilty of a war crime. And
soon the filming was in full swing, and so was the partying. The stars and crew were taking over the town. Ground zero was the Kelly house.
We used to have these wonderful impeach Nixon parties.
During the summer, there was a lot of girls coming to the island.
And we were, after all, a big-time Hollywood movie. There was a lot of interaction, I think it'd be fair to say.
Movie crews tend to attract a lot of women.
We were wild. And when all those girls from Ohio and everybody, all these, out-of-state girls flocked to Martha's Vineyard, we had some real good times.
Dreyfuss was scoring with the girls big time. And somebody was complaining to me, how come you're getting all the girls? He said, look, he says, I'm an actor. They know me from the movies. I've got a 40-foot head, so I have a natural advantage.
Do you know how many girls were on that island? Yikes. And when Duddy Kravitz opened, girls would come out in safety boats. There was a lot of sex. I participated in as much as I possibly could.
Steven and I sadly had no time for that. We were talking about the movie every night.
Meanwhile, the shooting was rolling toward the next big shark attack. Jeff Voorhees played young Alex Kintner, the boy on the raft.
Alex Kintner, they're beginning to prune.
Just let me go out a little longer.
I got a call. They were telling me, we're wondering if you can be eaten by the shark and stuff. And they were explaining what the machine did. It's going to explode all this blood up in the air. Just go underwater and stay underwater as long as you can. So I'm lying on top of this machine, and then all of a sudden, bam, this thing made some noise, and all this blood shot up in the air. It's all in my face. I tried to go underwater, and I was a nervous little 12-year-old out there.
The nervous 12-year-old kept having problems staying underwater.
The first time my arm was showing, and finally, I think after 4 tries, they finally said, this time we have a man in a wetsuit underwater. He's going to grab a hold of you and lift you up and down a couple times and pull you underwater. He'll give you air underwater from his gas tank. And so the final scene, that's where the one they used, finally after I think about 5 times they got it.
It was scary looking, even for his pretend mother.
I was just sitting on the beach. You know, I wasn't being looked at. I wasn't acting. I was just sitting on the beach as myself. And I saw that happen, and I just was sick, you know. It could have been really happening, and it made me ill.
The aftermath is one of the most famous scenes in the movie, when Lee Fierro took out her mother's rage on the sheriff.
Chief Brody? And he says, yes. And I slap him. I said, I just found out that a girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew it. And you didn't do anything about it. But still, my boy is dead now. Somebody, and I don't know who, had gone to him and said, she's slapping you awfully hard, Roy.
I was just trying to stay in my character. And I knew that in just a few moments, the camera was going to roll, and I was going to have to create that moment where I don't know that slap is coming. So that's not easy to do.
I think altogether I slapped him 17 times in one day. Many people have asked me to slap them, please. They have come from all over, and they ask me to slap them.
Halfway through the filming, Jaws was on track. The shooting on land was right on schedule. But they had no idea just how bad things would get when they headed out to sea.
Everybody was on edge every day.
It was a nightmare.
Star marker, flares, safety float, temperature gauge, spear guns, SMG.
What are you, some kind of half-ass astronaut?
After a month and a half on land, Jaws was about to set sail into uncharted waters.
The first 40 days of the movie went really well because we were all shooting the dry land stuff first. We kept some dry land in reserve in case something should happen to the shark. We need what we call a cover set in case something should happen. But when the shark started to fail, we went out, I think in a week we had blown our cover. Everything we had saved for a rainy day, a weather day, a mechanical problem day, all we had left to shoot was the shark.
Everything was harder in the water, even the basics of filming.
They were out on the ocean and they didn't know what the hell to do because it was going like this, you know? And if you put the camera on a tripod, you know, everybody in the theater would be seasick. I thought they probably had some elaborate Hollywood system that I knew nothing about that was going to solve all this. Well, it turned out they didn't. And so there wasn't anything else to do, and we had to do it handheld.
There's a reason movies have never been made at sea. Until Jaws, I don't think any studio ever tried to make a movie literally on the water. They avoided going to sea at any cost. And in our naivete and enthusiasm, we were going to shoot on the water. And that had enormous, unforeseen consequences.
The waves change, the wind changed, and the boats all want to change direction.
Everything that you didn't have with you had to go back to shore to get it. If you needed it, then you had to have a boat for grip equipment, electric equipment, the lights, the cameras. It's mind-boggling. They were hiring boats off the beach. Hey, do you have a boat? Do you want to drive it?
In the middle of this armada was the centerpiece, a barge used to run the Shark. There was so much paraphernalia on it, they gave it a name.
The SS Garage Sale.
That was the call sign. Garage sale, Shark City, over.
Garage Sale was a custom-built island that housed all the equipment that were the controls for the Shark.
And the first thing you did when you went out, you had to lock down the garage sale, throw some anchors over, get them locked in, and then you have to get the fish down in the water, get the lines run.
The team would go out early in the morning, before first light, to set up the shot and position the boats.
We had anchors all over the place on the 30-foot deep sandy bottom. But when the current was raging, it would drag the anchors.
Bill Butler would pull up, and first thing we would hear is he'd take a look and go, "It's in the wrong position. The sun is way over there now." Well, it took us half a day to get it there. And so there was another lost day.
And it would pull the electrical barge this way, and the camera barge that I was on would go this way, and the orca would go that way, and it would just be separating you, and the shot would be lost.
We would get things fastened down, and whammo, there'd be a sailboat in the background.
These huge sailboats from Hyannis and all over start sailing.
Steven would go bananas, and I would go bananas.
It had to be a clean horizon line. We had to make the audience feel as isolated as the cast on that little 51-foot boat.
You can't have sailboats out there. Looks like people are having fun.
We had to wait for these sailboats in the middle of the summer to go by.
You had to wait for the frame to be free. And if one sail came in, we had to wait the whole time, hoping that that wouldn't happen.
But as the last sailboat would go, two more boats would appear, but they weren't in frame yet. And then the decision would be, can we go right now? We've got 7 minutes before the next sailboat comes in, or we can re-anchor. And re-anchoring took usually an hour and a half to 2 hours. Those were the decisions I had to make, more than aesthetic, creative, artistic decisions. Those were the big kind of logistical decisions that all of us had to collaborate on just to get a simple shot.
Today, it would be so easy. Today, you could digitally knock all those boats out. We didn't have that technology.
Meanwhile, several crew members like Dreyfus had no idea how to handle their own boats.
Steven says, okay, I want you to take the boat, and I want you to pull around the corner in and then park it. And I said, Steven, I don't know how to do this. I've never been on a boat before. And so after the 17th time of me crashing into the dock completely incorrectly, they finally stopped that and started the shot with me already, there.
Say, I hope you're not going out with those nuts, are you?
Dreyfus, yeah, he didn't like the water. It didn't seem he liked the water. That's what I remember.
Problems began adding up.
Days spent waiting for the weather to clear. Days spent repositioning the boat, re-anchoring the boat, moving the boat to accommodate the light. And the suits at the studio were going crazy because we were going over schedule and over budget.
I think we had something like a 60 or 70 day schedule, something like that. Maybe 60 days, maybe less than 60, maybe 55 days. I don't really remember the actual original schedule, but I know we went 157 days.
Every lost day cost tens of thousands of dollars.
He took a $4 million budget with a schedule of May 1st to June 28th. And we left the island September 16th. And we still had 2 weeks more in the tank.
The budget was going crazy.
The budget went from 4 to 14, I think, which is today like 30 to 150.
Inside, there was a maelstrom of just anxiety and I guess basically insecurity, because when I wasn't able to control the day, and the day started controlling me and all of us, and we were at the mercy of the winds and the tides and the currents.
And we went so over. I think We must have set some kind of record.
Bill and I would sit around and start looking at oceanographical charts and saying, let's see, maybe we could take the whole unit to Jamaica, or maybe we could move this someplace.
Universal is a studio that was very strict about running over time. They made their money by staying on schedule and on budget.
The shark stopped working, and the barrels stopped working, and special effects stopped working, and there was nothing to do but to lie down on the deck of a ship, waiting for the assistant director to come over to me and say, we're ready to go.
The big question was, would they pull the plug in Martha's Vineyard and bring us all home and finish it for a minimal budget on the lake? Or would they allow us to keep shooting on location?
Beyond all the location issues, the main problem was the shark. Every time they thought it was ready, it went belly up.
Every single day, the shark would malfunction. Something would go wrong. Some part would blow up or whatever.
We hated the shark. The shark was a rubber dummy that never worked.
Maybe we should have built a tank and shot a lot of these shots against the blue backing.
It was a nightmare.
People started to panic a little bit about what's going on.
And all the while, the biggest fear went unspoken. What if the shark finally didn't work at all on screen?
I was scared to death that there was no way to finish the film at any price.
At home, we got a taxidermy man. He's gonna have a heart attack when he sees what I brought him.
By July 1974, 3 months into the filming, Jaws was supposed to be finished, but the production was barely halfway done.
It was a scramble. The whole 5 months that we were there was a scramble.
The cast and crew were feeling the strain.
Every day you had to film. Tempers got short, and marriages failed.
27-year-old Spielberg was feeling the pressure most of all.
It was as if we weren't making any progress. It was like we were shooting a movie against a very strong headwind or a very fast tide and current. And as we were plowing through the script, it seemed we were being pushed back against the current every day.
In the middle of all this, a kind of feud broke out between two of the stars, Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw.
Richard had a movie that just came out called The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz.
Richard Dreyfuss is reading some very good press notices.
And Richard one day brought the New York Times onto the boat, and it had a double truck ad with 30 reviews.
Robert was competitive about everything and anything, and so I guess he might have been competitive about the reviews.
Dreyfuss would say, what am I doing on this island? Why am I here? I should be signing autographs in Sardis. I should be feted all over New York City.
That did it for Robert Shaw. That was, I think, the beginning of the great Dreyfuss-Shaw feud.
Shaw was a troublemaker. Shaw was an instigator. He liked to get people riled up.
He was totally malicious. He really thought Dreyfuss needed a slapping down. A young punk with no stage experience.
And because there was a natural tension between his character and Dreyfuss's character, there was also natural tension between Shaw, the actor, and Dreyfuss, the actor.
You got city hands, Mr. Hooper. Counting money all your life.
All right. Hey, I don't need this. I don't need this working class hero crap.
He was an enormous personality, and he radiated it. And in private, he was the kindest, gentlest, funniest guy you ever met. Then we'd walk to the set, and on the way to the set, he was possessed by some evil troll who would then make me his victim. I was his victim.
So I would say, look at you, Dreyfuss. You eat and you drink and you're fat and you're sloppy. Your age, it's criminal. Why, you couldn't even do 10 good push-ups.
He would challenge Dreyfuss on all kinds of levels. His favorite, one great trick that he did to Dreyfuss as an actor is just before they'd start rolling and have to be seriously acting, Shaw would lean over to Dreyfuss and say, mind your mannerisms. And they'd start shooting. And Dreyfuss, of course, would be trying to mind his mannerisms and be present as the actor.
When you're competitive with someone who's 3 times your size, and who is already given one of the greatest Shakespearean performances in the world, it wasn't hard for Robert to get my number.
Robert would basically humiliate Richard into taking a chance. For instance, Robert would say, I'll give you $100 if you climb to the top of the mast on the Orca and jump off into the water.
And then one day, he was coming down the gangplank. He had a glass of bourbon in his hand, and he said, help me out, will you, Richard? And I said, you want me to help you out? Yeah.
Richard took the shot glass out of Robert's hand and threw it out the window.
At which point, every drinker on the crew went, ooh.
That was the shot heard around the world. It got ugly. It got ugly. But it was also Quint and Hooper living out that relationship as Shaw and Dreyfus.
And the next scene was me at the cleats, trying to get the cleats cut. And there was water all over the place. And Robert took the fire hose and stood behind the camera and aimed it at my face. And that was the one day that I lost my sense of humor.
Nowadays, these kids, they take out everything. Radar, sonar, electric toothbrushes.
I had this idea at one point just to have, Richard watching Robert polishing off an entire can of beer, and then Quint crushes the can in his hand. I said, take your styrofoam cup of coffee and crush the styrofoam.
Got such a laugh, I can't tell you.
As the weeks went on, all the cast and crew were going a little crazy.
People got very cabin fever, as they call it.
And how do you psych yourself up for this kind of regimen every day? Scotch, vodka, gin, whatever.
No, we all have different methods. I do tend to drink when totally bored. Roy does exercises, Roy Scheider, and sunbathes. Scheider does that, and Dreyfus talks. Dreyfus just talks interminably.
One of the reasons why it takes such a long time to make a picture like Jaws is because it's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time. It's the time it takes between the takes that takes the time that takes to take.
Day by day, Jaws kept getting further and further behind.
For most of the time, the industry thought that there was a catastrophe going on because we went over and over and over schedule.
Then one day, the ship just started to go down. Literally. They had actually built 2 boats called the Orca. One specially designed to sink at the end, but this was the other one. The one with all the actors and crew on board.
They said, the Orca's sinking, the Orca, and you rush out there.
And he said, Bill, the Orca is apparently sinking. Apparently sinking? It was going down like a rock.
I had him screw a bolt into the back side of the boat and then tie that line to a motorboat and have the motorboat just take off, and when it hit the end of the line, it would rock it over as if a huge shark had hit the bottom of the boat.
And it popped one of the planks out.
When the barrel started to go down, the entire bottom of the Orca pulled out, and the boat began to sink.
And the water was coming up, and I had the camera, and I began to get really quite angry because it seemed so obvious that somebody should take the goddamn camera before it got wet.
I was able to come up and grab one camera, and Eddie Serkin grabbed the other camera, and we saved the cameras.
But one magazine case fell in, or they didn't grab it in time or something. And one magazine case did get wet.
And then they got the film, put it in fresh water, shipped it to New York, and they were able to save the film.
And Steven was sending safety boats to get us off the boat.
Everybody's yelling, get the actors off, get the actors off. The boat's going down.
And there was a 70-year-old sound man with a $50,000 Nagra tape recorder.
John Carter had his Nagra, recorder over his head, and he said, I won't say the word. He said, blank the actors, save the sound department.
And you could hear Steven on the bullhorn going, get the actors off the boat, get the actors off the boat. And I yelled, Steven, he's 70 years old. And the guy looked up and went, that's a wrap for sound.
A young Spielberg was being tested in ways he never imagined.
He'd call all the time and tell us all the misery, all the things that were happening and how terrible it was and how everything broke.
The kind of difficulty that Jaws had with the weather and the shark, it permeates everybody. It just becomes a nervous set. And I think there was a considerable amount of fear.
Sea conditions have been
so impossible that it's really hurt our schedule and, put a general somber note behind the scenes on the production, because we've been here 105 shooting days. And we were only scheduled for something like 65 or 70.
What we didn't know was that he would put a piece of celery under his pillow every night. That was his good luck thing. And he, had to lay there every night saying, they're not really firing you. They're not really firing you.
At times, especially when you're by yourself at night, it weighs more heavily than during the working day when your mind is on getting good film. And it's sometimes at night you realize that it's a great responsibility and you're juggling a lot of cash. And it's sometimes very frightening.
He was busy trying to keep an insane production from essentially melting down.
I would call either Wasserman or Scheinberg and report every day. At times it became very nasty and threatening and abusive. There was a lot of threats on both sides.
I think he was terrified, probably afraid that one day somebody was going to come fire him.
People didn't think they could make heads or tails out of the footage. It had gone way over schedule and way over budget.
There was a point where he thought he would probably just be yanked from the movie and they'd bring in someone else.
I watched a boy become a man because he was threatened with firing every day. There were, people second-guessing him at all times. He never gave in to the stress, except that he bit his nails. That was it.
One night, Spielberg went to a dinner on the island.
An actress came over to me and she said, everybody's talking about this movie back in Hollywood, and they're saying this is the end of your career. And they're saying that you're so far over budget and schedule, nobody's willing to hire you after this. And I left the party. I was devastated. And I went back to my log cabin and just sat there and felt sorry for myself.
We were dying and we were taking all the calls from the studio. And I never let Steven know. He had enough problems.
There's an old saying in vaudeville, never let him see you sweat. I shared a house with him. I knew that he was sweating because we were both anxious. But it never came out in front of the crew.
I would take the abuse from the studio and dish it back to them. And threats were going back and forth every day.
The picture was 100% over budget.
At one point, they would talk in the early going about shutting down the picture completely because they obviously don't know what they're doing. It won't work. Let's cut our losses. They were very, very concerned that this was out of control.
For Spielberg and the team, the film was nearing a turning point.
My heart sank because I knew that the footage was useless.
Not all the shooting was done in the waters off Martha's Vineyard. One small team was stalking great white sharks off the coast of Australia.
I had two advisors on the movie, Ron and Valerie Taylor, who were really good shark experts from down under. Rodney Fox, who had actually been attacked and almost killed by a great white shark, was part of the Australian second unit shoot.
The second unit did find sharks, but they were only 15-footers.
I came up with the idea, it was kind of a joke at first. I said, well, get a midget and put him in a small cage. That'll make the shark look bigger.
We can get a little person to be in a miniature cage, and the biggest shark they could find was 16 feet. Wow, maybe it would look like it's 26 feet.
Carl Rizzo, a 4'9" stuntman, was hired to stand in for Dreyfus as he meets the shark face to face. But the shooting would turn into a scene every bit as scary as the film itself when the great white attacked Rizzo in his cage.
Unfortunately, he did have a heart attack when he was down there because the shark started pounding his little cage. And, the bars were very small. It was a little frail cage, and he survived.
The big problem was he got down into the cage, big shark came, he sort of panicked, and he sucked up all the air. And I went to Bill, I said, Bill, I screwed up. I didn't realize that small people still breathe like big people, and he only had like 8 minutes of air because the tanks were so small.
The next day, a call came in with more news.
He said he shot the most exciting shark footage he had ever seen.
The shark got into the breakaway cage and did all this incredible stuff.
And as he was telling me this, my heart was sinking because I had to get to the next question, which is, Ron, was the little guy in the cage? And he said, no, he hadn't gone down yet. And of course, my heart sank because I knew that the footage was useless.
We looked at the footage, and Dick Santa said, where's Hooper? Well, Hooper's supposed to get eaten, you know?
Without the double in the cage, we couldn't use it.
In real life, and Ron and Valerie were underwater with their underwater 35mm cameras, getting the shark that was stuck on top of the cage and was started to roil to try to work its way out of being trapped. It was really powerful stuff.
In the screenplay, Hooper dies, but this footage was so strong, Spielberg decided to change the story and let Hooper live on.
A great white shark off the south coast of Australia rewrote our script.
The final sequence was so intense, even the Taylors couldn't tell which was their great white and which was Bruce. Of course, the most intense shark scene had no shark in it at all, just the three key actors, and one of the most harrowing stories anyone had ever heard. The real-life story of the USS Indianapolis. The initial idea came from the interim writer.
Howard Sackler said, you must explain why this man, has a biblical vengeance against sharks.
Spielberg wanted to expand Quint's speech to explore the roots of his obsession.
Every one of Steven's friends, Francis, Marty, Brian De Palma, John Milius, all took shots at that speech.
My donation was, it has eyes like a doll, a doll's eyes.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
I remember sending it to my friend John Milius. And I said, John, read the script and maybe you can help me. So John actually read the whole script and made a lot of interesting changes and adjustments.
One day they were shooting and he and Rick Dreyfuss called and they said, we got to have this reason why he hates the sharks. And so I just sat down and wrote it out.
When he got hold of that speech, he wrote a brilliant 8-page soliloquy about the sinking of the Indianapolis involving Quint, being on the Indianapolis when it went down.
The explosion is like the dinner bell, and the sharks are going to come and there's lots of people in the water to eat.
Robert was the one that cut it down to 4.5 to 5 pages. He was the one that organized the long Milius version and got it down to a length that we could actually commit to film.
It's just one of the most harrowing of all World War II stories.
The story of the real-life Quint was classified for nearly 30 years. The tale of the ill-fated Indianapolis and its top-secret cargo.
We had brought on board the innards of 2 atomic bombs. We didn't know what atomic bombs were. We had no clue.
He was coming back from the island of Tinian to Lady, just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb.
The ship was torpedoed on its way home.
Well, the next thing I know, there was a terrific explosion, and we went flying in the air.
I looked around, and this was an unbelievable chaos. Men were all over. Some were crying, some were screaming. This was not an experience any of us had ever thought about.
Somebody came by and said, prepare to abandon ship.
1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour.
And they started to surround us. And for me to estimate how many sharks there were, I can't. But I can tell you there were a lot of them.
They went right around us, a lot of fins. They didn't come in to the group, but they circled us.
Well, we didn't know. But our bomb mission had been so secret. No distress signal had been sent.
The days were long, the nights were long, the days were hot, nights were cold.
For 5 days, the survivors floated at sea as the sharks circled.
And men would they would drink the water, get delirious, swim out, and the sharks would get them.
And it was gruesome. The sharks would pull them down and eat the extremities, and the rest of the body would pop to the surface.
Shark comes to the nearest man, that man, he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes Sometimes he wouldn't go away.
Nearly 1,200 men went in the water. Only 316 survived. Of course, it was Robert Shaw's performance that made the scene epic, but it came at a price.
Robert Shaw came from a great tradition of hard-drinking English actors. He was a contemporary of Peter O'Toole and Albert Finney and Richard Harris, all of them notorious drunks.
He came to me that morning of the speech. He said, you know, I'd like, with your permission, to take a few drinks and then I'll do the scene. About an hour later, he was sort of carried onto the ship by two of the crew members.
That was the longest day of our lives. Somewhere in a parallel universe, that day is still going on.
Robert Shaw was completely in the bag. He was tanked when he did that speech.
He wasn't really able to do it that day.
And at 3 o'clock in the morning, he called Steven and said, "How badly did I humiliate myself?" And Steven said, "Not fatally."
The next day, he came and did his stone sober and just knocked it out of the ballpark, absolutely stone sober.
Where there are shots of him from day one drunk and shots of him from day two sober, and you can't tell. It's just a brilliant performance.
So 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945.
The Indianapolis. That's my favorite part of the film.
It's so beautifully written. It's so beautifully played. It's the scene that I think is the most human in Jaws. And I'll argue that I think it's one of the best directed sequences that Steven Spielberg's ever done.
For the survivors, seeing the scene was an emotional moment. Most had long kept a silence about those events.
I more or less kept away from things that would alarm my family, knowing of what I had done in the war. And
when Jaws first came out, my kids went to see it. They said, "Dad, you got to go see these." And I said, "I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go looking at sharks."
They had no idea their story was part of the film.
it was a shock when I heard it. I got to tell you, it disheveled me just a bit. Here was a man telling my story to the world.
I thought it was good that they did something like that. It's part of history.
We owe a great deal to Robert Shaw. I never met him, but as a member of the crew of the Indianapolis, I can honestly say we owe a great indebtedness to him.
And for the filmmakers of Jaws, this gut-wrenching scene would be a pivotal moment as well.
Halfway through the movie, we thought it was not working, and it wasn't. And it wasn't until he told that story and he and Richard Dreyfuss started to compare shark bites.
Okay, so we drink our legs.
That night, the movie was made.
In a whiskey-soaked evening, Jaws had become a film.
Once we shot that shot, once we had that scene, in our guts, both Steven and I knew we had a movie.
Of course, not everyone was quite so certain at the time.
I thought it was going to be a disaster, and I said so on TV.
I thought, oh my God, I've gone too far.
But an amazing success was on the horizon, if they could just finish the movie. In September of 1974, after nearly half a year on Martha's Vineyard, the Jaws team was finally ready to shoot its last shot. They were months late and millions over budget, but it was at last time to blow up the shark.
It's a slow motion thing. Special effects are busy.
They rigged the shark head with fake blood and a special ingredient.
I came up with the idea, well, let's just get a lot of calamari because it looks like, meat and stuff. So we filled the whole thing with the squids.
They had just one shark head to work with, just one chance to get it right.
The sun's going down and they're not ready. Steven turned to me and he said, "I'm going home."
The next day, when the scene was ready to roll, Spielberg was nowhere to be found.
We were on the plane back from Boston, and I said, "So how's the last shot going?" And he said, "It's happening right now." And he was afraid that the crew was going to throw him into the water. So he set it up and left. And that became a Spielberg tradition, and I think he still does it. He never shoots the last shot.
Smile, you son of a...
The location shooting was wrapped, but no one knew how the film was going to turn out.
I thought it was going to be a disaster, and I said so on TV.
It was the fault of no one but Universal Studios. It is not Steven Spielberg's fault.
I repeat that. It is not Steven's fault or anyone's fault. It is the fault of Universal Studios giving this film an arbitrary May 2nd start date, that the script was never together, and the script never got, in my estimation, to where my character should have been. And instead of it being an interesting character, it became a kind of nebulous function within the film. And as an actor, I am disappointed. I was, 26 or 27, and I didn't know enough. I just knew that it was, had quadrupled its budget, and the shark didn't work, and who knew?
Are you saying that you're going to be bad in Jaws?
In my opinion, yes. Well, I just don't like the work I've done, that's all. I had made a mistake. Thank you, Dick Zanuck and David Brown. That's the truth.
As for Spielberg, he was still having bad dreams.
Even the next night in Boston, he had nightmares about being, in a storm at sea. And then the same thing when he got home to Los Angeles, he would have recurring nightmares about being at sea until he realized he was sleeping on a waterbed.
Working with veteran editor Verna Fields, Spielberg began piecing the movie together.
Most of the editing took place in the San Fernando Valley, in her pool house, where she had a small editing room, and that's where the film was really cut.
She was known as the mother hen to Steven, Bogdanovich, and Lucas.
She was really wonderful in scavenging from other scenes to find little 5-frame things to make cuts smoother.
Meanwhile, Spielberg was tweaking as he went.
Steven had come up with an idea to do a couple more shots when he was cutting the film together with Verna Fields. He wanted to do a shot where Ben Gardner's head floats through that famous hole in the boat.
I got greedy. I said, I bet I can get one more scream out of the audience.
I built a hole in his driveway again and duplicated the hole. We brought it to Verna Fields' home and put it in her swimming pool.
To replicate the murky waters of the Atlantic, they poured milk in the pool.
I had this idea that as he's looking at the tooth and the audience is distracted by the interesting sides of the tooth, when he turns back to the hole, I'd have Ben Gardner's dead head with one eye missing come out of the hole, right in Richard Dreyfuss's face.
The last key element was the score. John Williams was working on the music that would define the movie.
I think the greatest contribution he did to any of my films that resulted in a huge commercial success was Jaws. And he put the bite in the shark with that very primal Stravinsky-esque theme.
The first time Williams played the theme for Spielberg, he thought it was a joke.
I can remember playing the so-called shark theme on the piano, dot, 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 a couple, 3 notes at the bottom of the piano, and Steven, and him saying to me, well, you really think that will work?
But soon, no one was laughing.
The music. Da-da, da-da. It was scary.
Johnny Williams does as much to create that shark by that music as anybody did who built the shark, because you see that shark when you hear that music.
The music was unbelievable. It's iconic. Everybody can hum it.
To take some of the darkness away and put a little adventure back into the plot was what John did.
Da-da, da-da.
You can't stop these notes. They're coming at you.
Dum 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 bum 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 da-da-da.
It hits that crescendo of just feeding, eating, death. It's terrifying.
Give me a hand. I can't. Give me a hand. I can't get up. I can't. Help me. Come on, help me. Get your feet out of the water. Get your feet up.
Insistent repetition of 2 or 3 or 4 notes gives us this sense of not only propulsion, but an unstoppable, primeval force.
If you went swimming and I started playing that music, you'd run out of the water.
The night of the first public screening, Spielberg and the producers were certainly terrified.
I had no idea commercially how it would perform. Of course, the movie lost all this money, and the 157 days of shooting was for naught, and the studio was, in the red, then of course I probably wouldn't have gotten another job.
Steven and I were sitting next to each other, and we had never seen or heard an audience reaction.
I was too nervous to watch it from my seat, so I watched most of the movie from right near the curtain So if it wasn't going well, I could just take one step back and I would be out in the lobby.
And we both clutched each other on the arm when that first scream happened.
When the little boy is taken on the raft, the scene where the shark comes up and the boy is brought underwater, a person got up and started to leave, and I thought, oh my God, my first walkout. And the person began to run. I went, oh my God, it's not a walkout, it's a run out. He's fleeing the premises. And the person passed me, heading for the restroom, didn't make it, and threw up on the floor of the lobby of the Medallion Theater. And I thought, at that point, I thought, oh my God, I've gone too far. I should have edited this picture more. What have I done?
People were seeing Jaws for the first time and jumping out of their seats and throwing up and running out of the theater and buzzing with excitement.
But then when the audience started making noise and going crazy and screaming and yelling and clapping after every big scene, I knew that I could go to work again.
I can remember at the end of the film, everybody in the theater standing up and cheering, actually cheering. We walked out of that film, and there was Richard Dreyfuss, and we stood on the New York street, and Dreyfuss was screaming, "We did it! We did it! This was great! It was great!"
Because there'd been a year of tension leading up to that, and we never knew whether we actually had it. But that first scream told us everything that we needed to know. It was amazing.
The movie would go on to break every attendance record, becoming the highest-grossing film of its time. Audiences loved it.
I think Jaws is a perfect film. It was something that happened during our time that can't be replicated. It's like lightning in a bottle.
You've got that slow climb up to the top, and everything seems fine, it's slow, and then you hit the first drop, and then boom. And you feel the earth drop out from under you. And that's what Spielberg does to an amazing degree in this movie. He really just kind of lulls you into this false sense of security, and then boom, just kind of hits you with that.
One secret to its success, Jaws was released in a brand new way.
Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss. Jaws. See it before you go swimming.
Studio execs Sheinberg and Wasserman decided to open it nationwide on hundreds of screens across the country simultaneously. It had never been done before.
I felt we had not only a hit, but I felt we had a really terrific movie. We opened it in what was then considered a very wide opening, 440 theaters. This country was taken over by Jaws.
When coupled with a nationwide marketing campaign, it created a box office smash.
People were Jaws crazy. They were seeing sharks. They were buying Jaws jewelry. They were buying Jaws underwear, Jaws posters, Jaws cups, Jaws games. It was one of the first times in history that a film actually had the merchandise that went along with it that did so well and became kind of its own business.
It's the first picture that I can remember that owned the summer.
This film played in theaters for close to a year. Like, it was there forever, and it was #1 on the box office charts forever, and it just kept piling money in.
I loved going to a theater on Broadway in New York, and then going to a theater in the San Fernando Valley, and then being in Dallas again and seeing the movie playing in July in Dallas, and then I saw the movie play in December. It was still playing in December all over the country.
For the cast and crew, and even the audience, Jaws is the movie that changed their lives.
The success of that film gave me ultimately freedom to make any movie I wanted to make.
35 years later, it's clear that Jaws dragged the audience and everyone who worked on it into uncharted waters.
It was fun to be part of something so big. Peter and I would meet scientists all over the world that got involved in marine biology because they had seen Jaws.
Above all, Jaws was the film that changed Steven Spielberg's life. The movie he thought might destroy his name in Hollywood ended up making it.
That's when the name Spielberg became a household name. As a young kid, second picture, that it's got to be the most incredible thing.
According to Spielberg, the the shark made the rest of his career possible.
The success of that film gave me ultimately freedom to make any movie I wanted to make after that. And I don't think with the success of Jaws, anybody would have given me a chance to make Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
The movie wasn't just a success, it created an industry, a series of sequels, Jaws 2, Jaws 3D, Jaws the Revenge. As for Spielberg himself, he went on to direct the long list of hits for which he is known, from E.T., Jurassic Park, and the Indiana Jones movies to Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List. Other young directors too were inspired by Jaws.
It's mind-boggling. Kevin Smith, Bryan Singer, Steven Soderbergh, all of these directors, Eli Roth, they got in the business because of Jaws.
The movie made its headliners into full-blown stars. Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters and The Goodbye Girl. Roy Scheider, All That Jazz, and Blue Thunder. Robert Shaw passed away too young. Just 3 years after the film's release, he died of a heart attack filming in Ireland. Other actors became stars behind the camera. Jeffrey Kramer, Deputy Hendricks, ended up the executive producer of hit TV series like Ally McBeal and The Practice.
It just all worked. The actors worked, the script, which was written nightly, worked, the editing, the picture. It was this perfect creative storm. And I was just grateful to be a part of it. It was heaven.
Jonathan Filley, the boy on the beach, became a successful producer and production manager on such projects as Sex and the City and American Gangster. Lee Fierro, Mrs. Kintner, became artistic director of the Island Theater Workshop, where she still acts and directs.
I don't think any of us had any idea what a sensation this movie was going to create and what a blockbuster it would become. None of us knew that.
And Lorraine Gary is making documentary films on human rights. Behind-the-scenes players on Jaws would have a major impact all through Hollywood. Sid Sheinberg ran Universal for 3.5 decades. He is still producing. Producers Zanuck and Brown went on to turn out some of the big hits of the past decades, from Driving Miss Daisy to The Verdict.
It's such a landmark in all of our careers. I'd had a whole life before in the business, but still it was a highlight of mine. Jaws and Spielberg became synonymous, and the rest is history.
And 35 years later, fans still love the movie.
I saw it the other day, and I was amazed that 30-some years out, and it still plays.
People still watch that movie because it scares the hell out of them.
It's probably pound for pound one of the great moneymakers of all time.
The achievement of Jaws is that we've created a monster of the summer blockbuster. I think if they re-released it in theaters, people would queue around the block again.
It wasn't a horror movie, it wasn't a slasher picture, it was a sea-going adventure movie.
In the end, it was the impossible conditions that made the movie and created the first summer blockbuster, all because the shark didn't work and the ocean was impossible.
My advice is never make a picture on the water because it's totally unpredictable.
This would be both the worst experience of my career and the greatest experience of my career.
Above all, 35 years later, Jaws is not just a film, but a state of mind, a fear that still resonates.
I don't really hang out in the water too much.
I remember Steven and his wife and me and my wife, we went on a vacation to Hawaii, and we were like these two old Jews, you know, standing in knee-high water and just going, and that's as far as we would get, because we had just learned too much.
I don't like deep water, never did.
During the course of the picture, I started getting very, very nervous.
We went to Hawaii for vacation to get away from everything. And I look out and the surf's pretty good.
I'm afraid to go in the water.
I said, Steven, will you ride one of these waves and you'll get this wonderful experience?
I don't go out as far as I used to.
And he said, I'm not going out there because they're waiting for me. They know. For the rest of my life, they know, and they have a score to settle. And I'm not going in that water, you know?
I became scared of the water.
And I said, there's never any sharks at Waikiki. And he said, nope, there are sharks everywhere, and they have the word. The word is that I'm here and I'm a marked man.
I feel safe because I don't go in the water.
3.5 decades later, Jaws still stalks the dark currents of our fears. It may never be safe to go back in the water again.